today is entitled Social Media from the Chat Room to the Classroom. And as always, brought to you by the 3 core members of the working group, myself as representative for the National Association of Geoscience Teachers, Ed Robeck from AGI, and Missy from NESTA. And in the background, working the tech for us, Mitch Bender-Awalt. Thank you very much, Mitch, for being here. So we do have one upcoming webinar. I said this was the last in the series, and it's not. Thank you, Ed, for reminding me. We do have one upcoming webinar, and that will be on May 13th, and we're really excited about this one. This upcoming webinar on May 13th will be Geoheritage Elements to Enrich Earth and Space Science Teaching. So we'll be very happy to bring that to you. Please watch for registration information. It'll be coming out to you in the next week for sure, probably the beginning of the week. So watch for that. And as always, our webinars are archived on the AGI YouTube channel. There is an entire playlist of them. There are, I believe, 45 of them or 44 of them as of this one. So please drop in there and do view some of those webinars that you may have missed in the past. So as always with our webinars, please feel free to type your ideas and thoughts and questions into the chat box during the webinar. And especially with today's webinar, let's use that chat box as if it were, well, you figure it out, one of those social media tools that you enjoy using. But let's have a great conversation today in the chat box as we go through the webinar and the presentations from each one of our panelists. So our panelists here are listed. I'm going to go ahead and turn things over to Missy. Missy, please take it away.
Sure. Thank you, Aida. And welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We have a wonderful set of panelists for you. Wendy Bohon is here from IRIS. Annie Scott is here from the USGS. Dave Thesenga is here to represent NESTA, along with John Henry Cottrell, who is also here from NESTA. And welcome also to Adam Taylor from Dickson County High School. As Aida had mentioned, please use that discussion and Q&A and chat box to get our discussions going. And we will move forward with those questions that you post towards the end of our webinar. Next slide, please. So to get us started today, I just wanted to mention that perhaps some of you participated in a survey we sent out. We were wondering about what is the usage of social media in education, in science education in particular. So we had about 159 people respond to the survey. And so we're going to run through a few of the survey points real quickly for you, just to give you an idea of what it's like, the landscape is like out there as regarding the use of social media in science education. Next slide, please. So the first question we asked is, do you use social media for educational purposes? And so this partitioned out our respondents to those that did and those that did not. And as you can see, that an overwhelming number of people actually do use social media in education. And then we asked those that did not use social media in education, why not? And so some were concerned about privacy issues, some were just too busy. They didn't think their social media skills were up to it. And then of course, you know, in some of our schools, social media is blocked and they don't want us using it. And then there's the others that are maybe not too trusting of what they find on social media. Next slide, please. And so for those people that did respond positively, we asked them to, well, what do you use social media for? And this was one, you can see that the responses are quite high. And so people are permitted to choose as many responses as they'd like. And so you can see from the array here that there's multiple reasons within a profession that teachers use social media, from finding current events and webinars and other opportunities, searching for instructional resources, for networking, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole number of reasons why people would use social media in education. And then you can see from the breakdown, what platforms do people use? Well, a lot of them venture off into Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn. But we also had some people that actually visited Instagram for education and Pinterest, and a sliver of people that actually went to TikTok and found a few things there. Next slide, please. So the next question we asked, well, okay, here's an array of words. Select the ones that you think kind of fit your feeling towards social media. And so the ones that you see popped out here are the ones that kind of popped out for us. And what's really interesting is that one's in the middle that says supportive. And that's, this notion of social media, that this notion of building community is dead set right in there, kind of really high in there. And next slide, please. And then what we did is we asked them to select one of their choices and expound upon it. And so in the top row, you can see that there are some reasons, some positive reasons why people use social media. They find it convenient with an explanation there. They find it effective and supportive. And so that gets at the whole nature of social media. But then again, we had some people that said, whoa, it's a bit overwhelming. Others, then it's unhelpful. It's because it's just this big thing. There's a lot of places that you can go. And that was also iterated in this notion that it is confusing. And just being able to find some quality materials for our classrooms. Next slide, please. And so the last question we asked is, well, what challenge do you find? And so as I iterated with the first slide with the people that don't use social media, that it's this notion of we have limited time. There's only so many places that we can go to within our hours of planning and prepping. The quality of materials, we're kind of concerned about that. Again, those firewalls, and then just not knowing enough. And so next slide, please. I think what you're going to find with this webinar is a lot of those questions and concerns that were brought up and highlighted. We're going to go into a bit detail today with the webinar. So I'm going to pass it over to Wendy Bohon, who's going to give you an overview of social media and science education. Wendy, take it over, please.
All right. Thank you so much, Missy. So it's always best to start the story at the beginning, right? So let's define what we're talking about when we're talking about social media. So Kaplan and Hanlon define it as a group of internet-based applications, and this is the important part, that allow the creation and exchange of user-generated content. So there's 6 different types of social media. We're not talking about the virtual worlds. We're talking about the other types of social media, things like collaborative projects such as Wikipedia, blogs and microblogs. That would be things like Twitter, content communities like YouTube, and social networking sites like Facebook. Importantly, email and instant messaging technology, texts and things like that, those are technology. Those are not social media. And so I want you all to take a moment, maybe even write in the chat, how much time every day on average do you think Americans spend on social media? Now remember, that's not Google, that's not Amazon, that's things like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube. So how much time? All right, 5 hours a day, 2 hours, 3 hours, 2 hours, 4 to 5, 1 to 5, 2 to 3. So yeah, we're talking hours, right? We're not talking minutes here. And do you think that the United States is higher or lower than the rest of the world in terms of that average? Higher, lower, higher, about the same. Okay, it's confusing, right? There's a lot going on. Next slide, please. Turns out that the US spends about 2 hours a day using social media, which is slightly lower than the worldwide average at around 2 hours and 24 minutes a day. Next slide, please. So we know that there are all of these people that are online. How can we use the functionality and the ubiquity of social media for educational purposes? And in particular, to teach concepts around earth science. Next slide, please. The first way we can do this is to use it to stay up to date on new science and breaking news. And so this was demonstrated very clearly by the USGS during the Kilauea eruption. So we all remember that, right? Everybody was very excited. And the news media, scientists, people that lived in Hawaii that were interested, as well as just the worldwide interested public, was getting most of their information through social media sites. The USGS Volcanoes earthquake Facebook page and Twitter page. So that was primarily where everyone was getting this brand new information. If you wanted to know, you turned to social media. Next slide, please. There are also resources on social media that are used for teaching about concepts that are breaking news. For instance, and this is just one of many instances, IRIS puts out a recent earthquake teachable moment. after any magnitude 7 anywhere in the world or a newsworthy earthquake anywhere. So these come out within 24 hours. They're available as PowerPoints or PDFs. And they tell the story of the earthquake, what exactly happened, why it matters to society. And the idea is trying to catch this teachable moment, that critical time when students are interested in what's happening in the world around them. Next slide, please. And this one I think is really, really important. You can follow scientists discussing science in real time on Twitter and also sometimes on Facebook. This is very important, I think, for students to see because it allows them to see that science is a process and that it's a process where we change our conclusions as more data becomes available. So here's just 2 examples from Twitter. The first one, which I know you can't read, they're just more there to jog my memory. That was also during the Kilauea eruption, and the scientists were talking about how the caldera was subsiding. And someone asked, well, what does that mean? What can we expect? How are we going to learn from that? And lots of scientists chimed in to talk about why that was important and what they were expecting to happen next and why. At the bottom, this is 2 seismologists talking about the earthquake cycle and whether or not that's a good framing anymore for concepts around earthquake science and how we teach earthquake science. Next slide, please. So there's a wonderful science educator named Heidi Stelzer, and she uses social media quite a bit with her students. And when we asked her what she thought was most important for using social media with students, what she said is that diverse views represented in social media help students to think about alternative ideas and to discuss those ideas. She also commented that it was an amazing opportunity for students to follow and network via Twitter and to share their insights, to really develop their voice. I included an infographic on the right here that's from Darling 2015 et al. That's talking about the role of Twitter in science publication and communication. And the reason I put this in here is just to point out that there is a great deal of literature and scholarship that goes into how social media can be used in educational spaces and in science communication. So this isn't just us saying, oh, this is a thing we knew. There's a lot of people that are working on this. And so there's a lot of best practices around how to do this. Next slide, please. I'm about to hop up on my soapbox here. If you teach students that are underrepresented in scientific spaces, this is something I really want you to listen to because there's a lot of work out there that talks about how social media can cultivate communities of support for minorities that are underrepresented in academic and science spaces. So social media can provide connection, community, mentoring, sponsorship, and advocacy. It's a low-cost, low-barrier engagement tool, which we already know. It helps to increase structural diversity and representation, and it also brings awareness to intersectionality. It can help to reduce feelings of isolation for minority scientists, and it promotes an increased sense of belonging and cultural wealth. So if you have students that are not likely to see themselves in popular media, this is the place to show them. There are scientists that look like them. Representation matters, and social media is a great place for showing the full breadth of the wonderful thinkers and people that are doing science in the world. Next slide, please. It's not just about your students. Social media is great for you. You can use it for networking and professional development. And indeed, the survey showed that many of you are already doing this. If you're not, know that this is a wonderful opportunity. We can't all go to all the conferences, but we can follow along with our peers and our colleagues and learn what they're learning through their process. Next slide, please. Someone also had mentioned Pinterest in the survey. Pinterest is a great social media tool. If you're not using it, you can use it to organize online materials, sites, images, and lessons. These are some pictures from our collaborators, UNAVCO, talking about geodesy. So you can find all of our GIFs and movies, lots of different lessons with links back. It's a great way to stay organized. Next slide, please. So how do you support your students while they're doing social media? The first thing you want to do, set clear goals and expectations, just like everything else. You want to really be certain to review digital safety and digital literacy, discuss proper social media etiquette and techniques or certain best practices that go along with social media. And we can talk a lot more about that a little later. One of the important things that students need to recognize, as we all know, that when you put something online, it stays there. So don't say anything online. And this is my personal thing. Don't say anything that you wouldn't say at your family holiday party. You can be silly, you can be irreverent, but make sure you're polite. professional, you're positive. There's lots of other good suggestions on the internet. I'm happy to give those as well. So next slide, please. So I'm trying to go really fast about something that I really want to talk a lot about. So I'm just going to sum up with this. There are a lot of benefits to using social media for science education, increasing student participation and giving students that voice, the opportunity to use their voice in a different type of space, building greater teacher-student connections, increasing student collaboration. This is an opportunity to connect students with professionals. I know Adam's going to talk about that today. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to teach digital responsibility and digital citizenship and to help build a positive digital footprint. We hear a lot about the bad things on the internet. There's a lot of great things on the internet, and we can add to that greatness by having all of our information, all of our science, and our students online adding to that. So thank you, and take it away, Missy.
Wendy, that was terrific. Thank you so much. Next up, we're going to hear from each one of our experts, our panelists, who will share a little bit of insight on different topics within using social media in science education. So first up, we have Annie Scott from USGS. Annie, come on up, and I've got a question for you.
Okay.
Annie, how and why do you curate content differently for each platform?
That's a great question. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about these things today. And so first, I just wanted to again, introduce myself. I'm Annie Scott at USGS. If you're not familiar with USGS, it's the US Geological Survey, and we're part of the Department of the Interior. So we provide science about natural hazards that threaten lives and livelihoods, the water, energy, and minerals and other natural resources that we rely on, the health of our ecosystems and environment, and the impacts of climate and land change use. Our scientists help to develop new methods and tools to supply timely, relevant, and useful information about the Earth and its processes. And so we have a lot of different parts of USGS. We all study Earth, so we're in the right place here with the Earth science teachers. And there are a lot of social media accounts. In fact, there are over 40 social media accounts for USGS. So the ones that I'm going to specifically talk about today are those for educators, for students, and for parents. And that's through @USGS_yes, which is the Youth and Education in Science, or YES office. So that's who I'm with at USGS. So we do also coordinate with the other accounts, and thank you for the shout out about the great work that the volcanoes and earthquakes mission areas did with Kilauea. That was very exciting. So first of all, we're always keeping teachers and parents and students in mind. So everything that we post is maybe a little bit different than some of the other accounts, and that those are the audiences that we're trying to reach. And so why we post information differently on various platforms has to do with two things. One, the capability of each platform. And two, yep, that's great. Thanks, Missy. And two, the target audience that we're trying to reach. And so for the capabilities, I'll go into that a little bit more in the how, but for the target audience, and we think about the three platforms that we're on anyway, we think about Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, they go progressively older in terms of the followership and the people that we tend to reach on those accounts. And so we keep that in mind for the type of materials that we're posting. So the first thing that we do is we just pick a trending topic. What's happening? Perhaps it's Earth Day or Pi Day or the birthday of a famous scientist or a national park, or a theme week like Earth Science Week or Bat Week, or even a theme month, such as the National Preparedness Month. So we first think about what we want to post and then how we want to post it on each platform, depending on who's on that platform and what we want to share. If it's an educational resource that we want to share, we're definitely going to use Twitter or Facebook. The reason that we use Twitter and Facebook for sharing educational resources that link back to our website and to other educational websites is that way you can link directly to it. So Instagram doesn't have that capability. You can do a link in bio, which is if you have one link that you want to share, that will be at the sort of top of your profile. And people do change their link in bios. We don't, but some do. And that will take you directly to one web page. But that gets a little tricky if you want to actually talk about guiding people to a specific lesson plan or an activity. So as we're creating these posts, we do four main things, sort of our recipe for a post, if you will. And so Our goal is to always include 4 main things. That's an image or a screenshot so that you know what you're going to be looking at when you click on a link. That's really important. We don't want to clickbait anyone. We want to send you directly to the resource so it's easy to find. And all of those, the images are a little bit different in Instagram, like I said, because you can't share a direct URL. And so we try to put as much information as possible within the post itself so that you can get all the information that you need from that one post. Number 2 of the 4 things that we include in posts, of course, like I said, the URL, are also hashtags. So many of you may be very familiar with hashtags. I've only been in the hashtag game for a little while myself. Our accounts are relatively new. We've been only on social media on Instagram for about 2 years and on Facebook and Twitter for a little over a year. But a hashtag looks a little bit like a sharp symbol for those of you that read sheet music. I can't get that out of my mind when I see a hashtag. It's always a sharp for me. And so when you think about a hashtag, what that allows you to do is to actually make that term searchable. So that if, for instance, your classroom is talking about Mohs hardness scale, and you want to say, oh, okay, I'm going to put hashtag Mohs hardness scale into a post, either on Twitter or on Instagram, then you're going to be able to search all of those posts, and it just makes things easier to find. And so even if people don't follow our account, they can still see those hashtags if they follow those hashtags or search for those hashtags. Another thing that we on our account, we generally always share USGS, science, K-12, and STEM. So if you're following those, you'll see what us and other accounts share as well. We also use social media to tell students about internship or job opportunities. And so if your students are looking for those, you can also find those hashtags on our account. We also tag, like, and share other accounts. And the reason for that is to always tie the science back to that original source. So for instance, in Kilauea, if we're making a post about Kilauea, some sort of educational resource that's based on volcanoes and what's happening there, then we'll also tag the volcanoes account so that they can answer questions directly about the science that's happening real time. Hashtags are also really useful for campaigns. And so with campaigns, you might have something like a Find a Feature challenge or a Paper Explorer or some of the other ones that our account uses to try to get it so that we can see your content as well. And so it's a fun way to sort of be interactive. If you tag us and use a hashtag, we'll see that and can comment on what you may have found in your own neighborhood to show that science is everywhere. And then for Instagram is all about the images. And so we try to use high quality images wherever possible, or digital animations that discuss a certain geologic or ecologic topic. And so all of the material that we want to share has to be within the post. Again, so it's no URLs. You have to go to the link in bio. So just to kind of summarize there. So for Twitter, for all of these, you're always going to see some sort of image, whether that's an image of the science itself happening or an image of a screenshot going directly to what that lesson plan or activity might look like. But for Twitter, it's going to be short. We only have 280 characters, which include letters, spaces, emojis, and any punctuation. So you got to keep it short and sweet. But you'll be able to see a direct link to whatever we want to share, and also the hashtags. And then for Facebook, same thing. You're going to see an image, science content, a link, but you're not going to see hashtags because they don't work as smoothly within Facebook. And then Instagram is really where you're going to see the images, the science content, and everything that you need to see directly within the post. Okay, well, I think that's about it. I'm happy to take questions as we go along, but that's a little bit about how we curate things for different platforms. Thanks, Missy. Back to you.
Terrific. Thanks so much, Annie. And again, use that chat box to send some questions along our way. Next up, our next panelist is Dave Thesenga, representing NESTA. He's got a question too. Dave, come on up. And your question is, how do we develop a positive community in Facebook, encouraging debate while avoiding negativity? Take it away, Dave.
That's a short question, Missy. Thank you. So it's good to talk with you all today. I've been a moderator now on the NESTA Facebook site for, it seems like a long time, but really only 5 years. Facebook can be exhausting, but it can be incredibly beneficial. And there's been some movement away from it. A lot of you may have actually canceled your account or paused your accounts because of the negativity that's out there. So I encourage you to come back to Facebook, not because I have any in on Facebook or anything else like that, but because it can actually be a very positive environment. You as a public figure, if you're a teacher, Facebook considers you to be a public figure. And you can actually create your own public figure account, which is separate from your own. So I have two separate accounts. I have one that is my own personal account. I have one that is Mr. Thesenga, my teacher account. No one is friends with me on my Mr. Thesenga account. It is just me. I host my classroom platforms on there, and they are able to actually have group chats with me, as well as look at what I'm doing. The biggest thing, though, that you can do in order to encourage positive community on there is to set some ground rules, like we all do in all our classes, setting ground rules about what it's going to look like, but also making your feed be engaging and controlling your feed. Facebook allows you to control your feed. It really does. The Facebook algorithm will respond to what you choose to like. If you want to follow USGS, and I encourage you very much, please follow USGS. If you want to follow about the earthquakes or volcanoes, or you want to follow Mars Perseverance or Mars Ingenuity, they all have their own Facebook page. Facebook algorithms will respond, and they will begin to actually suggest to you other really quality sources of information. You need to be in control of that situation. As a moderator, when you make a group, not only do you need to provide good guidelines for this entire operation, but you need to actually moderate, which sometimes in this case means that you need to get your hands dirty and cancel people out, mute them, have conversations with them offline. For the most part, most education communities are pretty positive until it gets to a touchy subject. Climate change is still a touchy subject. So when we start getting into those regions, I usually get a little bit more involved. How do you get involved? You need to post polls, something to interact with people on a positive way. Take posts and actually make those posts more than just a repost. Actually say something about them. How could you use these in the classroom? Ask people those sorts of leading questions in order to encourage the debate to come back at you what you actually want it to be. If debate just gets out of control, you are always welcome to mute the conversation, and you're also able to actually, if you are the moderator, you're able to just pause the entire conversation. And periodically, I do have to do that. People appreciate it because they do go to Facebook in order to have a positive environment, as that is. As a teacher, when you actually utilize it in your classroom, your students can become friends to your Facebook page of your classroom. You make a group, like I have the Science 8 Period 2 group, which is not a very exciting title, but nonetheless, that's where I post different things from Facebook, and my students utilize their own Facebook pages and they access it and they actually do comment. They are not able to post anything. I control those postings. If a student wants to post something to my Facebook page or to the Facebook group, I have to moderate that. I have to control that. I make note of those sorts of things. And they actually do like it. They enjoy when they're actually doing that and they actually get their post up there. So I think that in order to do that, creating that sort of positive environment from polls and imagery, as Annie was saying, imagery is so important. Anytime that you can provide an image that helps to reinforce what it is you're talking about and how you actually want to do that. All times you need to be active. You have to have current events out there. You have to create the environment of all that information. People want to know, people are going to Facebook for resources. So provide them those resources. Answer people's questions. It is not a passive environment. You cannot have an active Facebook group and be a passive person. It doesn't happen. So you need to be an active person in terms of that, and your positivity will encourage a positive environment. Missy, back to you.
Terrific. Thank you so much, David. Next up on our panel is John Henry. John Henry, pull up your camera and your question. And next slide, Aida, if you don't mind. John Henry, how much tech experience do you need and how cumbersome is it to run multiple social media sites at the same time?
Good question. Thank you, Missy. I'm John Henry Cottrell. I'm the president-elect of NESTA, National Earth Science Teachers Association. And so basically, I accidentally fell into the social media aspect for NESTA. I happened to notice that we didn't have a Twitter. And then as I was building the Twitter, accidentally built up a Pinterest and then a YouTube. And then I also helped David with the Facebook from time to time, though he's like 95%. I just do a really tiny amount on the Facebook. And so what I'm going to talk about is actually those four, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Pinterest, and how we actually kind of link them together. And the way that I've found is best is to actually start off with the most restrictive one, which is Twitter, because it has the least character count. And for videos, you actually can only have like about 2 minutes of video. Some of the other ones you can go much longer. So Twitter's far more restrictive, and so I start with that site. So next slide, please. The first thing I like to say is just be patient. Okay, when I first started, I didn't know a single thing about Twitter, like at all. I had never even opened Twitter and even looked at it. And then I created the NESTA account and then started like trying to jump in it. I also had some teacher assistants because I also teach over at Hemet High School in California. And my TAs were helping me out. And for the first 3 months, not much was happening. And it was a major disappointment because I had these extra benchmarks that I thought I should have, 500 followers within 3 months. And it was a little unrealistic in the beginning. And I was about to quit, quite honestly. And actually, it was Wendy from Iris. She was extremely helpful to me because I actually reached out to her in Twitter. We had never met before. I had only known her through Twitter and the Iris account. And she kind of gave me some advice. And that was one of the nice things that Twitter has. It does have a nice community. And one of the hardest parts about Twitter is that it does sometimes feel lonely because unlike Facebook, where people are constantly talking with each other, Twitter, you don't get a whole lot of content, but when you a conversation, but when you do, it's actually feels far more meaningful. And she gave me some advice, and I kept tracking. And as you can see, we've gone from in 3 years like 0 to I think it's about 5,700 followers at this point. So be a little patient with it. You don't have to have background. It's really just about working through it. And at that time when you're like, this is not worth it, I'm just going to quit, you're probably just at the edge of it actually starting to take off a little bit. So be patient with it. Don't go in with too high of expectations. Okay, next slide, please. And so first thing is following. The way that I follow things is I ensure that we only follow those that we want to see on a daily basis. So we don't follow absolutely everybody who follows us back. I want to be able to look at the feed and be able to understand who's following us. What I do create is a lot of lists, okay? And I'm using Iris as an example here, where you can go to lists, and then they're actually on 5 lists. There's another one called Geology that they're also linked on. And you can also have private lists. So that's what those links are. So it's only for me, and everybody else does not get to see those, okay? Now, these lists are super powerful. Number one, it puts people in and makes them realize that if you don't follow them, you still know that they're there, okay? One of our biggest ones is, for instance, like the geoscientist one. I can then take those lists, organize them into TweetDeck, and then I can actually see, for instance, the one that is Geology. That is everybody that's in the Geology, and that's all I see are tweets from Geology. Next slide, please. Now, I make a tweet, I put an image on it, I actually put it into Pinterest, and I use the exact same wording that I used in Twitter, and I use that in Pinterest. And so now I've got a bunch of images that are nice and organized so that I can actually use them for a later date. Next slide, please. Same thing with YouTube. I create a video, and you don't even have to have your own video to have a library of videos on YouTube. So this video, in this image at the bottom right here, if you press on the save, it pops up the list. I created a bunch of folders, and I just click geo engineering, right? And that's where that video goes in. I can organize all sorts of videos that aren't even personal content. They're from other content. And I'm not stealing it or anything because it still gives those individuals credit for their video, but I can now organize them. Next slide, please. And then for reposting, now I used to have my Twitter and my Facebook linked, but I found that was a mistake because it didn't always link things exactly as I wanted. Some things on Twitter work well, not so much on Facebook. And so I found it is better just to actually copy paste. And as David also mentioned, I don't use a personal profile. I have a separate profile just for NESTA, and that's something as a teacher you can do as well. Next slide, please. And then lastly, you can use hashtags. And one of the things that I use hashtags is I didn't know what to do with these great tools that I see all the time from all different places, okay? And later on, I ended up helping create the NESTA website. And when I did, I already had all this information I was able to throw onto a website. And if you'll notice, it's the same exact image that is on the tweet that's on the webpage, and I use the exact same wording. The whole point here is that it's not about running each one of these things absolutely separately. It's really just about linking them. I really only work on the Twitter account, and then the other ones are just kind of like secondary that I just double up and copy paste things on. Thank you.
John Henry, thank you so much. That was terrific. We're going to move on. We have two more panelists. Adam, you're up next, and I've got a question for you as well. So Adam, take us into the classroom. How can Twitter and other social media be useful with students in the classroom? Thank you, Adam.
Yes, this is a great question. So there's lots of ways, as has been mentioned already today. Connecting with professionals is a major way that I use it with my students. What I have them do is I have my own Twitter list that I've created of different types of scientists, and you can find it on my Twitter account at 2foot Giraffe. But what I have them do is I have them investigate these scientists. They'll have criteria that they have to follow. Like the scientist has to have tweeted about their topic in the last 10 tweets or so. They have to have replied to somebody in the last 2 weeks. If they meet those criteria, then I have them make a list out of those scientists. And eventually I have them follow them, but not right at first. The point of that is to have my students start to kind of see what the scientists are posting. I'll have them do a daily retweet of a scientist that's on topic, on whatever topic we're in that day. And the retweet also has to include a comment or a question about whatever's been posted. So that's how I get them started connecting with scientists. The scientists will see those retweets, and then it opens those scientists up to, oh, these kids are watching me. And then, so I know they're there. Oh, look, I got another retweet. And that also helps them to come around on being able to answer questions. Sometimes scientists are a little hesitant to answer questions from students because they don't know what the motive is. And it's hard to tell that it's a student asking them questions. So that's one thing you need to watch out for. But also current events. When we start our earthquake unit, our seismology unit, I have the students follow on TweetDeck, making a Twitter list, a couple different earthquake accounts that are constantly posting earthquakes. One particular account posts any earthquake smaller from 1.5 or 2.5 and up, which they're getting completely inundated. So that's how I have them keep track of earthquakes, is by seeing these accounts. That helps them see how many earthquakes are happening. But the other way I have them use Twitter or social media in the classroom is to share the science they're learning. If we're watching a short video clip, I'll have them live tweet the video clip using the class hashtag. Like for my class, let me post it right here at it. I messed it up. Anyway, this year, the class hashtag I'm using for Twitter is Tay-Sci. Just Tay-Sci. Sorry, I just posted it. In the years past, I've used Tay-Sci 1 for period 1, Tay-Sci 2 for period 2. So if you check those out, you'll see postings from the past. Anyway, I have them live tweet class. I also have them make videos about our topic and tweet those as well. I've even been using TikTok a little bit this year and last year. So if on TikTok, you look up the hashtag TikTokSci, SCI, then you'll see some of our postings there as well. But the goals I have is to help students communicate with scientists and understand that Twitter can be used for learning. I also have it as a way for them to share the science that they're learning with the world. And sometimes we get responses, a lot of the times we don't, but that's okay. It still helps the students have responsibility for what they're learning and what they're sharing. And, of course, teaching all the etiquette and stuff like that. Those are the major things I wanted to share. So I think that does it, unless somebody has a question.
Adam, that was terrific. Thanks so much for giving us a little bit of insight on how we can effectively use this with our student during instruction. Those are some great tips. Wendy, we have a question for you. And so why would I want to use, instead of going to Google, why would I want to go to social media? What type of unique information is available via social media that would make doing this worthwhile?
That's such a good question. So the really interesting thing about social media is that it's a conversation, and that's a pro and a con, right? I know that when I was in school, I had this feeling that all of the questions were answered already. There was just facts. We needed to memorize and learn facts. And the thing that I really like about social media is that it gives you insight, as I said earlier, into the process of science and into how science is done. And truthfully, social media has changed how we're doing science. And it is just such a wonderful privilege to be able to see how it's done now. And I'll give you an example. So the Ridgecrest earthquake happened in California in July of 2019. And there were scientists in France that were processing the remote sensing data, so the data from space that was looking at the ground. And there were geologists on the ground in California that were going out to map the fault. So they were trying to figure out exactly where the ground had broken so that they could map it. And over Twitter, there were conversations happening where these French scientists were saying, here's the brand new image that I just processed, go to this GPS location and look for fault rupture. And so then the scientist would go take pictures, take measurements, and be talking in real time to these other scientists on the other side of the world. We were watching exactly how geologists do science. We were watching the multiple tools that you could use to do science. We were watching how the remote sensing folks were doing their science and how all of those things were contributing to the generation of new knowledge and new understanding of this earthquake that had literally just happened. That's not something you're ever going to find over Google. And the only time I've ever experienced anything like that, quite frankly, was in graduate school. So this gives you the opportunity to go into places that you wouldn't normally be able to access, like the laboratory, to have conversations with scientists. And I do a lot of talking about social media. And one of the things that we bring up a lot is trust. Who do you trust? You trust the people that you know, your friends and family. And social media allows you access to people in a different way. And so you can build trust and build a relationship with scientists and a different relationship with science itself than you would otherwise. And it lets you see kind of the whole process from start to finish. I think it's a wonderful view into something where it's just unique. There's no other place that I can think of where you get to do that sort of thing. So back to you, Missy. That's what I've got to say on that.
That's terrific. It really reminds us that science is a verb. The science is active, and that was just a terrific example of how that actually happens in real time. So now we're going to switch it over to all of our panelists. We have a series of questions that have been building up in the chat box, and plus we have some background questions as well. And so Ed, I'm going to pass it to you to fire away with some questions for our expert panelists.
Sure. So one of the areas that I think people might be wondering about is the time commitment that is involved in bringing social media into your classroom. Is there a trade-off here? Is there something that's not getting done because you are doing social media? That came up specifically when Annie was talking, but I think there might be some of the other panelists who have some ideas there as well.
I could kind of add to it because there's two aspects to it. One is running the Twitter, YouTube, Pinterest. That takes me about an hour a day, pretty much, to get those. And I get about 4 tweets a day off. I just do it in the morning. I come in before class, and then I shoot them off, and it takes about an hour. As for class time, one of the things that I tend to do is in the beginning of the class, while students are, the bell rings and kids are coming in late, for 5 minutes, I just will sometimes just throw up the Twitter and I'll just scroll through and I'll just have a student just say, hey, what's that one? And then we'll open it up. Sometimes I don't really know what I've retweeted from other places. I've kind of looked at it, retweeted it, I've opened it, I know it's legitimate and it's good, but I don't really spend a whole lot of time like delving into it. And then with students, we kind of delve into it and it causes a conversation, and it only takes about 5-10 minutes of class, and then we're off to doing what else we're doing. It doesn't really have to be linked to whatever I'm doing in the lesson that day, because what I found is that also it shows a couple different aspects. First, I could say, hey, do you remember that thing from last semester? Or I can also say, we're going to be learning about that, 2 weeks from now, or this is how this is, tangentially similar to what we're going to be doing in class. And so it kind of links a little bit, not just what we're doing today, but throughout the entire school year.
Thanks very much. Did any of the other panelists want to speak to how they manage the time commitment here?
Yeah, sure. I'll just say that it's indeed a great idea to maximize your efforts, like others have done. So starting with Twitter because it's shorter, copy and pasting it into the other platforms, and then you can always add more for Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to add more detail, go a little bit more in depth with any of the science, then you can do that. But starting with Twitter first, if you do manage multiple platforms, and then cutting and pasting it into others is a great way to go.
Okay. I also have a question specifically for Adam here. The activities that you're talking about that you're using with students, does that change the assessment that you're doing with students, and how do you engage them in the assessment of your teaching?
That's a great question. Part of the way I run assessment on these types of activities is their engagement and how well they're able to discuss the topic. Like when I have them make the short videos to post on Twitter or TikTok, the assessment is the video. If they can, they're only allowed to make it 15 seconds long, not because there's limitations on TikTok or Twitter, but because if they can't explain the concept in that short a time and simplify it enough, then I don't think they understand it well enough. Because then otherwise they just end up reading the content that they're trying to share. So that's how I kind of do assessments, at least on the Twitter, TikTok video side of things. As far as other things, I guess I'd have to look at more of what I've done and have more time to share that with someone. Maybe they contact me and I can leave my email.
Okay. And one that I would encourage people to look in the chat stream. I asked a question early on about inappropriate content and do students run into it? Both Adam and David have been responding to that. David, would you mind picking that up and just speaking a little bit to how you handle some of the issues around what students might run into?
Yeah, sure. They are adept at finding anything and everything that might be inappropriate. They're very good at it. So I try not to hide from it. They're gonna find it. So trying to say, don't do it is a fool's errand. They're going to do it. So we set up guidelines for this. We admit the fact that it's out there. We encourage them not to go down the rabbit hole of all that inappropriate stuff and not to make a big deal about it when they do find it inappropriate things. And if they can't handle it, then we have a larger conversation. I also encourage all the parents, because my 8th graders sign up for Twitter accounts. They all have them. And so parents have to be aware that they're doing this. And so they're intricately involved in this entire process. I encourage them to link their own accounts and to follow the hashtags and to engage themselves with their own children's social media usage.
Terrific. Thanks so much. Wendy, one for you, because you had some really great resources that people found interesting and attractive, is other than word of mouth and sort of just open-ended searches, are there strategies that you would recommend for how people find good things to follow?
Oh, yes. So the way that I recommend it, if you're just getting started on Twitter, maybe follow all of us. All of our information is up there. And if there are people that we follow, go to because if you go to say Twitter, for instance, there's the people we're following and the people that are following us. Go to the people that we follow and click on those people, because we have already gone through pretty much and vetted those people, especially from the industry or organizational accounts. So you know that those are really good people to follow. You can also follow people or find people to follow using different hashtags. So if you're interested in volcanoes or you have a volcano, thing coming up, hashtag volcano, and then read in their bios just pretty quickly, what they do. Are they a scientist? Are they a researcher? Are they a student? What exactly do they do with volcanoes? Maybe they work for industry. And so you can find accounts that way. But finding someone that has been good about pre-vetting, particularly like USGS industry accounts or IRIS accounts, and then going to your, kind of down that rabbit hole, that's a really great way to find people that are going to be putting out good content.
Terrific. Thanks, Wendy, for that. And this is, I guess, maybe open-endedly, but David, it came up while you were talking, because you said something about posting polls and also make your feed engaging. Are there tools that you would recommend, and where do people find out about these tools and how to use them?
Facebook actually has a Facebook for Education group, which is really very good if you're looking for just like, what the heck do I do with this thing? You could actually join that group, and literally you can just search for Facebook for Education and it will come up. Facebook really wants you to use their product in the classroom. Obviously, they have their own reasons for doing that, but they are providing a lot of resources on how to do that. If you are unfamiliar with how to actually create polls or create conversations like that, there are lots and lots of tutorials out there. You can also hit me up via Twitter or via Facebook, and I'm also more than happy to show you the way or show you some YouTube videos for how to do it. It's all out there.
Okay, terrific. I don't know that, I think we've made it through the questions that I have. I guess there was one more, and it was kind of a tension between something Wendy said early on and something that Adam had said. And Wendy, when you first started, you had said that social media is user-generated content. A lot of what we've seen, though, is other people posting like created content from other organizations. And Adam at one point in the chat said that what you post doesn't have to be original. So there seems to be a bit of a contradiction there, or a tension maybe that could be sorted out so folks understand.
Right. I can see how that would come across that way. User-generated content being it's made by the people that are using the platform. And that could be organizations, it could be companies, it could be individuals. It's anyone that's using social media. So it's not generated by some propaganda machine necessarily, right? We are all our own tiny propaganda machines if you dig down deep enough. But it's original content that's generated by the people that are using it, whether you're an organization or not. Now, in terms of creating original content or sharing other people's content, depends on what you want to do. The idea with a lot of social media is that you want to be able to amplify the really good messages that are out there. If there's really great science, some new finding, some really interesting or exciting thing, you share that, you re-up it, you amplify it. And that's another reason that it's really good for students, because we can have people that don't generally have their voices heard in the mainstream media can get amplified through social media. So that's a really good thing. Now, it would be really exhausting to have to generate all of your own content all the time. And so it's helpful, and we do this with NESTA and all kinds of partners where we share each other's content. because you want to leverage your partner organizations. You want to get that information out there, and you want to show those partnerships and that the scientific community, educational community is working together. And that's just a good messaging strategy anyway. If we want people to understand what we're saying, we have to have consistent messaging. And the best way to get consistent messaging is to share the actual message that the original person is putting out. You can add something on top. So in Twitter, you can write your own tweet, you can just retweet, or you can quote tweet. And if you quote tweet, it puts the original tweet that you're talking about, and then you can write something on top. So it's like kind of annotating it on the side of a book for other people. You know what I mean? So quote tweeting is really great. Sharing other people's content is something you really should be doing, because we want to get good messages, good science, good educational practices out there.
Which is probably, go ahead.
Can I say something about that? I agree with what she said. When I said you don't have to do original content, I was speaking more to the individual educator on their own, not so much organizations. As an educator, or as anybody new to Twitter, so many people think that they have to be tweeting something, and you don't. If you're using it to learn, I mean, that's why she said lurking is important. She said that in the chat, Wendy did, that, you lurk for a while to investigate how it works. So don't feel like you have to tweet your breakfast. Nobody cares. If you don't think you have anything to say, maybe you don't, and that's okay. Kind of get a feel for it. Retweet other people's good ideas. That will help them notice you. And then when you have something original to say, they'll be more likely to listen to you when you are already sharing their information. The other idea that everybody needs to know who's not on Twitter yet, or is just getting started and overwhelmed, Twitter is a waterfall. You don't have to read every tweet of the person you follow. You don't have to read your whole stream. You stick your cup in when you want to drink, and you let the rest go by. You don't worry about it. You just get it when you can. And if it's only 10 minutes a day, that's a great way to start.
Nice metaphor. Nice place to probably pull that together. I'm sorry, was there one more comment?
I was just going to make one quick little comment. Also, when it comes to Twitter, a lot of times social media, people are very familiar with Facebook, and they think that each one's a different type of Facebook, and it's not. Twitter, I think the best way to explain it, it's a magazine. And so you're kind of filling, your feed is basically your own personal magazine. So it's almost like when we used to have newspapers, you'd have the sports page or the food page, and you'd be like, I don't read that. You'd throw it away, and you'd only have the part of the newspaper that you cared about. That's basically what you're doing in Twitter. When you build your feed and you retweet, it's really like building your own magazine.
Nicely put. So the slide has changed, which is a reminder that there is a post webinar survey. The link is there on the screen. We would really appreciate it if you would take the time to do that. And Aida, I'm going to turn it over to you to talk about details as we close.
Thanks, everybody. What a wonderful discussion. And I know what I'm going to post next on my social media accounts, right? It's going to be about this webinar. So great conversation. Just want to acknowledge the sponsors of the webinar series here quickly. The National Association of Geoscience Teachers, NAGT, has a whole bunch of benefits for members, as well as a full webinar series. And we encourage you to drop in and take a look at other webinars in the series. I know there are a couple on my calendar this week, so drop in and take a look at those. Missy, do you want to talk about NESTA, please?
Real briefly, here, NESTA, we have a couple of our wonderful representatives with us today. Thanks very much for the whole panel, and as well as our NESTA members. Please consider joining NESTA is a membership society. We have a quarterly journal, monthly e-news, and we're, as you noticed, we're active on social media. Plus, we also have a conference presence. Next.
And Ed, you want to talk about AGI, please?
Federation of Member Societies. Many of you know who are involved in those member societies. Think Earth Science Week, think Education Geosource, and think of our social media posts. So thank you all very much for a wonderful webinar.
And as a quick last reminder, make sure to watch your inbox for announcements and registration to be open for our May webinar, which will focus in on geoheritage elements to enrich Earth and space science teaching, something I'm sure that you're all going to want to learn a little bit about if you don't already know about it. And here are the contact emails for Ed and Missy and myself. We'd love to hear from you in terms of any suggestions for our upcoming webinar series that will be for 2021-2022 that will start in September. So one more to go for this series. Thank you again very much to our panel today. Thank you to Missy for getting everyone together and pulling this webinar together. Wonderful exchange of ideas and information today. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on our next webinar.